over 70% of the H-1B recipients in the United States are Indian citizens. That speaks volumes. And when I do encounter a parent that is worried, oh, my son's not going to be able to get a visa, what's going on with this Trump situation, I say, look, if we gave up on recruiting Indian and South Asian students, Silicon Valley would fall into the ocean. And really, who would run these companies that we have? If you look at these three people up here, Sundar Pichai, Satya Nadella, Indra, it's absolutely incredible that they started their journey here in India and then got at least a piece of their higher education in the United States. And since we are in Karnataka, I thought that it would be kind of interesting to also say that each one of them is South Indian, right? Sure. Go ahead.
So we talked about, of course, the influence of from the Indian influence from the Aloo Gobi to Microsoft, and that certainly remains very strong in every part of the world. And we'll talk a little bit about the structure of the U.S. higher education system. Now, a lot of times we get this question, certainly, communicating with Indian parents especially, is the private higher education system a better option than the public higher education system? What is better? Which one should I see? Now, once again, this is just two different options on the table. Honestly speaking, there's no one better than the other. Again, every institution may specialize in a different area, and they may be doing good things in a different area. The big difference, again, we are looking at is the source of funding. For institutions like ours, where Dakota and I work, we are public higher education institutions, so much of the funding often comes from state and federal governments. While private higher education institutions might be, again, having a lot of their tuition and then, of course, endowments that would support their structures and background. So it's a big difference you're seeing is just the source of funding. And of course, sometimes we do get the question about the acceptance rate. Now, of course, at public higher education institutions, one thing that we do have to take into considerations, being land-grant institutions, that there's a certain responsibility towards our population. And that's why we have to make sure that we're giving everyone an opportunity to study at those institutions. Now, this means sometimes the overall acceptance rate may go up, but again, they may have, again, a different variation looking at different programs. For example, the School of Journalism, quite renowned at the University of Missouri, may have a very different acceptance rate as compared to some of the other programs at the university. So it's hard to say, once again, the overall acceptance rate if you're looking at those specific programs as well. And of course, with public higher education institutions, sometimes the limitations tend to be, as of course we have dealt with this as well. Often the scholarships tend to be very much merit-based. Unfortunately, that may sometimes not help students who are looking for financial aid options. There are public higher education institutions which may do offer financial aid options, but again, we do see that private higher education institutions may be a little bit more generous in that regard. And of course, the last point, to go back to the last slide, the general perception, again, you have private, nonprofit, as well as for-profit. And again, one has to be a little bit careful when you're choosing, which higher education institution to go into. There are different models, there are different means of generating that funds, and of course, you have to consider what works best for your student. As we kind of go further ahead, a little bit more on that structure perspective, community colleges. So when I went to the US after I graduated, I had the distinct pleasure of working for a community college for almost 4 years as a faculty and as an academic advisor. And I could say that this is definitely a great option, including for international students, because these community colleges tend to be for 2 years, and they offer you associate's degree. And again, what happens is with community colleges, the tuition rate in general tends to be quite low, which certainly is a good incentive for our international students. We do have four-year colleges and universities. Again, these are often regional colleges and universities, which may offer some great options for, four-year bachelor's degree program, but again, may not have master's or PhD options. We do also have some major liberal arts institutions that are doing excellent work when it comes to creative writing and many other areas. And the benefit of many of these liberal arts institutions they tend to be much smaller in size. For students who are often looking for a smaller class size, they may be a good institution to pursue. Then you have, of course, technical colleges, which tend to be very specific, a lot of times looking into programs in automotive, in machining, in welding, many areas of manufacturing as well. So once again, looking at the different options and what is the best fit for your student for that particular program, you do have a number of different options available. And then, of course, last but certainly not the least, the research institutions that we're part of, where research tends to be a big focus, not just for the faculty, but even for the students. And that's why we get them started early at the undergraduate level itself.
Sure. And let's talk probably the most important conversation that we have with everyone. Money. Scholarships are going to be one of the first questions that each one of the admissions representatives in here fields. And I think it's super important to note that each one of us is going to be incredibly different. And while I do hate giving that question to parents, students, teachers, it's going to be the case in a wide variety of questions that we do receive. So the big thing is going to be merit-based scholarships. I would say that these are going to be the widest variety of scholarships available. I'm willing to bet that almost each university from the United States here offers some sort of merit-based scholarship. Now, this can be based on a test score like the SAT or the ACT. It can be based on the grades that the student receives in whatever curriculum that they choose. This could also be based on some sort of extracurricular activity. Say the student is an excellent chess player or an excellent guitarist or painter. These are all merits. The vast majority of the merit-based scholarship is going to be academic. These are going to be the most common that you do find. However, when you are counseling students and talking to them about money and scholarships, it's important to make sure that you are diving into each institution specifically, because we do vary at such a high degree. Beyond that, we did talk about the difference between public and private institutions a little bit. Typically, private institutions will be able to offer a little bit more funding depending on the school. And Ragh did mention that most public institutions do have an obligation to their state or whatever it is that they serve to accept so many students from that location. So most of the funding for scholarships outside of these merit-based scholarships goes towards those domestic students that the community that the university is serving. Whew. Beyond that, I do want to go ahead and take a look at scholarship based on a factor. Let's go ahead and move to the next one. Sure. When you are applying for scholarships, like I said before, and continue to reiterate, everybody is going to be a little bit different. I know that my university in particular doesn't require an extra application for scholarship consideration. Once you submit all of your documents, you're good to go. Some universities will require some sort of essay or additional information to determine whether or not you will be considered for a scholarship. One of the things that sounds like a no-brainer when we do have the conversation is taking into account overall cost. I know that scholarships are going to be a sense of pride for students, and the total of the scholarship is also going to be something that everybody wants to tout, parents want to talk about. But it doesn't necessarily make sense until you sit down and say, okay, the total cost of this institution is this, the total cost of this institution is this, I'm going to receive this much money from here, I'm going to receive this much money from here, and determine whether or not you are actually getting a better deal from a monetary standpoint, right? The other thing to take a look at is going to be cost of living in conjunction with the scholarship. Now, this is something that everybody has to do through Google or whatever it may be. But students do live in the dormitories in their first year for the most part. But you can also save a lot of money by living off campus or living close to campus. So it's important to take all these factors into consideration once you do receive a scholarship notification. And the full scholarship, working for public institutions can be very difficult because you do have students that show up and are absolutely phenomenal and say to you, sir, what do I have to do to get a full scholarship? And India is a place where everybody does want to hear that there is a straight path to get into a school, to receive a full scholarship. And in many different ways, there's so many shades of gray that you have to be very diplomatic in answering to the student. Unfortunately, we cannot offer you a full scholarship. Now, there are universities out there that are public institutions like ours that do offer full scholarships to exceptional students. There are universities that are private liberal arts colleges. There are institutions across the board that do offer full scholarships, but they are few and far between. So it is important to be able to come down to the student's level and talk to them and settle the expectation early on. But, like I said, if you do want to search for this full scholarship opportunities, there is an entire network of high school counselors in here that have probably seen them before and know what institutions do grant those for those students that are high flying. Oh, great. So, the application process is going to be different from school to school, but also very much the same for a few base level things. There are things like the Common Application, which I'm sure some of you are familiar with. Many other universities have their own application in conjunction with the Common App. So if a student is interested in applying to a number of universities, the Common Application is probably the best way to go. It's the easiest, but if you are dead set on applying to one or two schools, it might be a little bit easier to go ahead and fill out that specific school's application. We are going to need the 9th through 11th from each student, because students are applying in their 12th grade. There might be an opportunity or an instance where the university counselor will reach out to you and ask for the mid-year marks of that student, or maybe even the predicted grades, depending on what curriculum they are coming from. Now, this isn't necessarily a bad sign. Sometimes this could be a case of us wanting to up the scholarship for the student because they are on the cusp of reaching a next level, right? Letters of recommendation are incredibly important to some of us. And we want those to really, some students will come at you and try and get the biggest name or the highest, I guess, person that they know to write a letter of recommendation for them. And we can see this. We see the title attached to whoever this person might be. But in the end, we really want somebody that is going to know the student through and through. That's going to be the most important thing. If they can speak to the student and speak to us about the student in a very well-developed manner, that's going to show so much better than somebody that doesn't really know the student very well, but is an important person. Sure, SAT or an ACT scores. It is a myth that you do require the SAT or the ACT to go to the United States. There's plenty of excellent institutions out there that don't require the SAT or the ACT, but we do encourage all students to take it because you don't want to take anything off the table. Most of us will also require the SAT or ACT for some sort of scholarship consideration. So definitely pay attention to when these test-taking dates are if you do have a number of students that are interested to go in the United States. This is also me. We did this in Lucknow a few days ago, and we had 2 other people joining us. So now we're working through it, and I appreciate your patience. Sure. Yes, ma'am. Do you deal with very many Fulbrights? Do you want to speak to that?
Not really.
Sure. Would anybody else like to answer the question? I don't want to give you any incorrect information. I understand that the Fulbright is mostly for students that are already in an undergraduate degree program, correct? Would you like to? Definitely. So my understanding is that the Fulbright scholar is actually enrolled in an undergraduate program when they complete their Fulbright.
I think so. I think it's mostly looking at the grad level. So, for us, what we do is primarily doing the undergraduate admissions. So we're not that familiar with the Fulbright perspective. So again, this is very much at the undergraduate level what we're talking about with the SAT and some of those other requirements.
So I'll quickly work through this one. I hope that helped, and that's something that we can talk about afterwards. Yeah. We saw a number of students up here that absolutely knew what they wanted to do right away. So they're starting early, and it's never too early to start researching universities. There are over 4,700 universities in the United States. It would absolutely be impossible to know the ins and outs of every single one of those, correct? So starting early is going to be the best thing that you can do in terms of getting all the information that you might need to study a scope that's so broad. So starting to think about college. Major is probably going to be the most important thing. Now, very often we do have students that don't know exactly what they want to do, and that is the unique thing about the U.S. education system. But you do want to kind of get an idea of what are my hierarchy of needs. What is most important to me? For some students, that is the major program. For other students, it is climate. For some students, they want to be next to one of those big famous cities that they've read about their entire lives. So in going through that list, it's important to determine, okay, these schools kind of match that criteria. I'm going to start taking a look at them. What are their scholarship opportunities? What kind of grades do they require? Do they require any certain subjects that I'm going to have to take during my high school years for admission? All of these sorts of things are going to be extremely important. We do recommend that students that are going to take the TOEFL and IELTS or the SAT and ACT to take those during their 11th grade. I know that here in India, depending on the curriculum, that year 12, the exams are going to be incredibly strenuous, and we don't want students studying for a test like the SAT or the ACT while they're also studying for their boards, right? And also, we want students to be working on their admission essay early on. Most of us are going to be incredibly impressed by a well-polished, thoughtful, in-depth admissions essay. We read tons of them, and we can tell immediately whether this is something that they just threw together or if this is something that they really cared about and really worked on. Reach out to faculty and counselors. So we talk about rankings all the time, especially here in India, but if we have students that are interested in a particular program or a particular type of research, a particular focus within a degree program, I would say that finding out who the faculty members that teach at that university and what they focus on is going to be one of the most important things that you can do. If a university is ranked, in the top 20 for computer science, but they don't study or research the particular type of computer science that your student is interested in, what use is that going to be to them? Right? So find out who the faculty members are, find out if they're generous enough to communicate with prospective students, which does happen, believe it or not. Stephen. And then find out exactly what my student can be doing to help prepare them for that transition. Is there an opportunity to get involved with that professor during their first or maybe even their second year? Early decision and early action are certain things offered by some of our universities here, and they can give you a little bit better of a breakdown of how those things work. Pay attention to those deadlines. While the August 1st deadline is pretty ubiquitous amongst U.S. universities, each one of us has our own scholarship deadlines. Each one of us has our own deadlines for documentation. Each one of us has our own deadlines for application submission. So once again, dive deep, find out exactly what these schools that your student is interested in needs for scholarship, needs for admission, and find out what the deadlines are going to be. Thank you.
So what exactly are admission officers looking in these students? Again, very much the short answer is everything. In fact, the New York Times recently had a great article about that, certainly it's a combination of things. It's not just the academics. I think that's one of the beauty about the U.S. higher education system, that the extracurricular perspectives, the leadership involvement, all of those things are taken into consideration. So these are some really good examples of things that we take into consideration. Certainly the high school performance is important. Grades do play a big part. But then we're also looking into a number of other things, their test scores, their admission essays, because that gives us an opportunity to get a glimpse in their personal life, but also getting to know about their extracurricular involvement. Perhaps this is a student, who has, made a drone for his classroom project or something else. So number of these perspectives are taken into consideration. Still grades play a big part, but again, I think that's the beauty about the U.S. higher education system. It's a more holistic process when we choose our students.
Sure, and I just wanted to add that when speaking with parents, I know that most of them that are aware of the extracurricular involvement criteria or aspect of the U.S. admissions process want to throw their kid into absolutely everything. They have to go to language lessons, they have to go to music lessons, they have to go and play some sort of sport, they have to get involved with volunteering, they have to do 10, 15 different things. And what we really want to see is not necessarily all that breadth. We really want to see depth when it comes to deciding on a few extracurricular activities that the student wants to get in. If you are interested in volunteering, if you are interested in getting involved with student government, make sure that they hold a position within that student government association. Make sure that they are high achieving at some of these things. Choose a couple of things and stick with those, and that looks a whole lot better.
So what are some of the resources, and of course, how could students prepare for this process better? I was having this conversation earlier with some of the colleagues in the room, and we talked about 12 years back, as I was looking for options to study abroad, there were very few options out there. A lot of times we had to track down a university coming in, through some advertisements in the newspaper, and you had to reach out. We didn't have the same opportunity of universities and faculty members coming into our classroom. Things have changed, things have evolved, and certainly going into the right direction. You have some major great organizations, Education USA, they have a presence here in Bangalore. They could always reach out to them. A lot of us, when we travel, we often reach out to them and we try to do some sessions with them. So they're a great resource. High school counselors, again, this discussion, the IC3 Institute, are all good examples of the evolution of counseling in India. And again, the encouragement that is happening from both sides of the table, from admission officers to career counselors coming together to help our students. And of course, reaching out to admission officers, I think this is something that is often, not utilized as much as they should. I'm here to help you. I'm here to help your students, counselors, parents, students, reach out to us. That's our job. We are here to help your students. So again, that's something that you can utilize. Send us an email. We'd be happy to do a Skype, WhatsApp session, a phone call, or perhaps meet in person. Again, we're here to help the students. And of course, starting early and again, making sure, putting time and commitment towards finding the best fit institution. You want to go to the school not just because your uncle went there, but also finding why is that school unique for perhaps the specialization that you're considering in. There are many factors to consider and not just one perspective to take into account just because your mom and dad perhaps said so. So again, it's a combination of things, and again, we live in times where these resources are available and certainly adding day by day many more.
Absolutely, and I just wanted to go ahead and add to reaching out to admissions officers. Social media has been an absolute gift in terms of all of us from around the world being able to communicate with one another. I belong to a few different groups on Facebook. I know there's quite a few other ones that if some of you counselors are interested, you should definitely try and join these groups, as they have become even an excellent resource for me in learning more about my fellow institutions.
Ladies and gentlemen, that was all the presentation that we had. We'll share our email addresses here with you. I know we're almost at 12:30, but perhaps we could take one quick question before we head towards lunch. So, and of course, we'll be happy to continue this conversation during the networking sessions also. So perhaps a quick question from any of the counselors. I see a hand raised in the back.
You must be reading a whole lot of recommendation letters as well. So what do you look for when you're reading a recommendation letter from a teacher? And how much importance do you assign to that recommendation letter when considering a student's application?
Sure. Now, once again, I think the beauty about the US higher education system is a lot of times different schools may be putting different amount of weight to different criterias, letters of recommendation, academics. Personally, I think at the University of Missouri, we do take them into consideration. It's, again, not just about the academics. When we're choosing students for certain classes, we want to know a little bit more. We certainly get a bit of their glimpse in their life through the admission essay, but I think the letter of recommendation truly tells about that counselor or teacher who worked with that students for perhaps a number of years, their classroom involvement and things of that. So coming from a different perspective, not just the student's point of view, certainly gives us a little bit more neutral perspective on, what the student's background was, and not just in the academic aspect, but even on the extracurricular perspective. So we certainly value that.
Sure. We do harp often about how important the personal essay or personal statement, whatever it might be, is, as in most cases we aren't going to meet these students face to face, and this is their only opportunity to tell them something more about us than what test score that they received. But I don't think that we do address the letter of recommendation quite as much, and how important that is to get that different perspective that Ragh mentioned before. So I would say that, like I said before, would be to go ahead and find somebody that really knows the student. Make sure the student understands that this is really another opportunity to showcase who I am through the eyes of someone else.
Ladies and gentlemen, let's go ahead and break some bread and keep these discussions going. Thank you.